After-action report detailing the matchup between Sons of Vengabus and Neurohelm buffering. As noted in the previous report, the mission was a straight fight between both teams, with the victory determined by highest percentage of battle value surviving at the end of the match. Turn timers were still in effect for this matchup, 60 seconds for each movement and 30 seconds for each shooting or physical to ensure all competitors would not take too long. The map itself was a hexagonal layout of 12 hexes on each side, randomly chosen from a selection of custom maps by role. All maps were surrounded by 20-high hardened buildings of construction factor 200. The map selected for this match was a desert map primarily composed of level changes and sand. Intermittent light woods added a small amount of cover, while the center of the map was a mud pit surrounded by level 2 terrain that would make acquiring line of sight difficult at the beginning of the match, and give shorter range mechs the opportunity to get a better range before engaging, though any mech attempting to navigate the mud would find themselves slowed down. This map would prove dangerous for all mechs, as both the sand and mud would increase the difficulty of all pilot skill rolls by 1. Team Sons of Vengabus brought a mix of good range power and tough brawling mechs. Cerulean's force was comprised of a clan refit Hunchback, which added both speed, firepower, and range to the standard Hunchback via the clan spec weaponry and lighter chassis, allowing for a larger engine to be dropped in. This loadout would allow the Hunchback to quickly close in the smaller maps and easily remove any mech not able to destroy it quickly. The Hunchback was complemented by a Shrek PPC carrier for a solid ranged firebase. An XL engine also allowed the unit to move faster than the standard version, ensuring it would be able to accompany the larger force. Karnk added an upgraded Megamek to the table. 5 tons heavier than the standard Megamek, it had strong armor and a solid mid-range loadout with twin targeting computer-assisted rotary autocannons. The ECM would also provide a good cover from the Artemis systems of the longbow. It was backed up by a Night Sky 4S, itself a strong brawler and very effective light mech hunter due to its pulse laser loadout and hatchet dissuading rear armor melee. It would suffer from some small heat issues, but jump jets made the worst of these issues avoidable. Team Neurohelm buffering fielded a force primarily of assault mechs. Mech Warrior Lincoln utilized an Annihilator and a Charger, while Sacred used a Longbow and Spider. The higher average pilot skill of the list was more likely to serve them well on the sand and mud of this map, while the open nature of the map and slower speed of their force meant that the plan would be for their primary firebase to stick together and cover one another's backs from a potential rear attack by the Night Sky. The greatest threat to the force was expected to be the Hunchback, as an Ultra Autocannon 20 could easily crack the armor of most of the assault mechs and make them vulnerable to internal hits, ammo explosions, or in the case of the longbow, engine death. The Spider in particular would be a useful asset in this fight, as it would serve multiple roles throughout, spotting for indirect fire from the elite longbow, a distraction for the more expensive Night Sky, and a major threat to the PPC carrier that would require the vehicle to be escorted at all times to make it riskier for the Spider to attack. Sons of Vengabus and Neurohelm buffering elected to start from the northeast and southwest corners, respectively. Sons placed their firebase in a position to ensure it maximum coverage and line-of-sight protection from the Neurohelm's longer-ranged weaponry, while the mobile units of the force were positioned as close to Neurohelm as possible without coming into line of sight. Neurohelm placed their firebase in a position where it could set up for maximum coverage of the field, and to make it difficult to approach without taking at least 1 or 2 turns of fire. The more mobile elements were placed to allow them flexibility with their angles of approach, with the Charger being placed in a defensive posture for the assault mechs, and the Spider being placed in a location where it could quickly move to flank. As combat commenced, both teams primarily were maneuvering for position, with the Night Sky and Hunchback making for the center of the map to try to avoid any early damage before they could bring their guns to bear. The Megamek and Shrek would move as one, again avoiding any possibility of line of sight until they were able to respond with their own guns. Neurohelm opted to move closer to allow the Annihilator better lines of sight on the middle of the map in subsequent turns, and to allow the longbow to reach medium range with the Hunchback. The Spider had been placed just out of range of the Hunchback and Night Sky's guns, and combined with the elite pilot and the longbow, they were able to get some good shots in on the Hunchback using indirect fire. The Charger would move conservatively, as at the moment it was intended as a deterrent to any attempt by the Night Sky to seek melee range for backshots. In round 2, the Spider jumped north to try maintaining line of sight and thus spotting on the Hunchback, who had moved carefully into the center to avoid being shot at by the Annihilator that was trying hard to get a bead on him. The Night Sky had moved to chase the Spider, and with the melee mech at least 2 turns out from being able to get in the rear of the longbow, the assault mech moved up further while the Charger moved to get close to the mud pit and prepare to distract the Hunchback should it start trying to get out of the mud. The Shrek and Jaegermech moved clockwise and away from the Spider, moving close to the level 2 walls as they continued to use their protection. The Spider was able to provide spotting data on the Hunchback again this round, and the Longbow scored a few more hits with its MMLs. An initiative win in round 3 by Neurohelm saw the Hunchback exposed to the Annihilator's guns, and to try to keep the Hunchback from shooting the Annihilator, the Charger was moved to melee range to attempt to kick at the Hunchback's head. The Night Sky was jumped back to the pit to help protect the Hunchback, as the Spider continued to swing wide around the arena. The Night Sky and Hunchback reacted to the threat of the Charger, prioritizing it for attack, though the AC-20's failure to connect meant the assault would come out with relatively minor damage. The Charger would provide spotting data this time for the longbow, and between it and the Annihilator they would score 2 head hits and enough damage to knock the mech over, generating a 3rd head hit to knock the pilot unconscious. This fall would put the mech out of reach of the Charger's kicks this round, as well as any fire from the Annihilator in subsequent rounds, but the damage done would mean aimed shots in the next round had a high chance of at least neutralizing the Hunchback's big gun. As they were now down a unit and had lost initiative, the Night Sky was jumped away to cover the back of the PPC carrier while the Spider and Charger closed in to take aim at the Hunchback. The Annihilator would back up to be just outside of the Jaegermech's medium range while maintaining its own, and the longbow also maneuvered to take aim at the Jaegermech. Despite aiming for the right torso of the Hunchback to try and destroy the Ultra AC and cause some engine damage, the Spider and Charger managed to go internal on the left torso, touching off an ammo explosion and destroying the mech through engine damage. Suns focused fire on the Annihilator, trying to wear it down while Neurohelm attacked the Jaegermech, causing enough damage that the heavy mech fell in the sand. With the largest perceived threat in the Suns list dead, Neurohelm committed the Spider and Charger to a full offensive in round 5, moving the Spider to seek motive crits on the Shrek and the Charger to close in. The Longbow and Annihilator stood still for better shots, while the Shrek and Jaegermech moved closer to get their medium-range brackets on the Annihilator. Shots were exchanged, and the Jaegermech managed to hit with one rotary autocannon, but jammed the other one in the attempt. The Spider would score a motive crit on the Shrek, reducing its maneuvering options in the subsequent turns, while the Night Sky would put out enough firepower to knock over the Charger, preventing a retaliatory punch. The combined weight of fire from the Longbow and Annihilator would once again force a PSR on the Jaegermech, which would fall into the sand. This fall would be compounded by the fact that the Jaegermech had taken 4 hits to the head over the past 2 rounds, and the fall would result in its 5th hit and ultimately doom the mech as the pilot failed to maintain consciousness. A punch to the side of the Shrek would result in even more motive damage and give the tank very little in the way of options in the following round. With the second Sun's mech down on the ground, the Spider was sent to try and take an aimed shot for the head of the Jaegermech to finish off the pilot and remove it from the match. The Night Sky followed to try and destroy the Spider before it could do any meaningful damage, while the Charger ran up on the Shrek to aid the Annihilator in its destruction, as it was deemed the largest remaining threat. Cluster rounds into the right side of the tank would destroy its engine and render the crew stunned for 11 rounds, removing the Shrek's ability to contribute to the battle, although the tank would land enough return shots to force a PSR on the Annihilator. The Longbow would take the turn to fire at the Night Sky, causing some minor armor damage while the Spider failed to finish off the Jaegermech. The Night Sky did damage the lower leg actuator of the Spider, but with no other notable damage, the light mech would continue to be active. In the physical phase, the Charger would finish off the Shrek with a punch and prepare to move in on the Jaegermech. The Sun's loss of initiative this round meant the Night Sky had little hope of protecting the downed Jaegermech that had failed to wake up, and so the medium mech would jump away while the Charger and Spider closed in to seek out the pilot kill. Ultimately, it would be the Spider who would finish off the Jaegermech, making the Night Sky the only remaining unit on Sun's side. In round 8, the Night Sky would continue to flee, pursued by the Spider and much slower assault mechs. Round 9, Tarnk would issue a Bachal against the Charger with his Night Sky, which would be accepted by Lincoln, who would bid away all small lasers on the mech for the fight. Tarnk responded by bidding away his large pulse laser, ensuring the match would be a close-in duel. As Suns had no mechs remaining bar the Night Sky, they would be unable to punish use of melee for the duel. The Night Sky would now be expected to move to the range of its medium pulse lasers, and maintaining that range to prevent Neurohelm from declaring the duel invalid and opening fire. Further, the night sky would need to maintain line of sight with the charger and always fire at least one weapon in it each round, or again risk retaliation from the Annihilator and Longbow, who by now are seeking to establish overwatch on the entire field. The night sky closed in with the charger, taking advantage of a level difference to prevent retaliatory melee as it struck out against the charger's legs. Round 10's initiative allowed the charger to initiate a charge on the night sky, potentially dealing 32 damage if it connected. However, both units missed with their melee, and the charger was displaced into an adjacent hex. In round 11, the charger put its back to the wall to force the night sky to choose between rear shots and melee. The night sky opted for melee, and it managed to blow a leg off the charger in the firing phase and prevent itself from being kicked in return. Round 12, the charger made one attempt to stand up and continue the fight, but fell on its head and passed out. Deeming his challenge against the charger completed, Karnk then issued a Bechal against the longbow, which Sacred would accept without reservation. Round 13, the night sky would close in with the longbow, and the two would exchange fire. The longbow shaved off a notable amount of armor with the last of its LRM ammunition. Round 14 had the longbow and night sky facing off at 30 meters. The night sky would manage to damage the longbow's engine, but would ultimately pass out after 3 SRM hits to the head of the mech. The longbow would also score 2 engine hits this round, putting the night sky up to 14 heat and causing the mech to additionally shut down, as without a conscious pilot, no attempt to override the shutdown may be made. The match would end in round 15, with the longbow finishing up the night sky by destruction of its left torso and the loss of its engine, risking shutdown and ammo explosion in the process. While pairing a cheap light mech and an expensive elite pilot in a mech like the longbow does reduce the amount of armor one can field, it opens up other avenues that would not be available to a lower skilled list. In this instance, the Spider enabled the longbow to provide spotting data that, despite the usual penalties associated with indirect fire, still had good chances to land and damage Sun's units. Despite doing limited damage in the match, the presence of indirect fire on the field may have applied more pressure on Suns to expose their own mechs in order to start making shots of their own, or risk significant damage before they could even bring their guns to bear. This match further demonstrated the utility of veteran pilots when going into unknown maps. The sand covering the map and making all pilot skill checks more difficult was causing Sun's mechs to be knocked over on a 7 every time they took damage, and the subsequent roll to see if the pilot took damage added to their troubles throughout the match. While the pilot hits could mostly be attributed to Neurohelm's cluster weaponry, both of the Sun's larger mechs would black out as a result of pilot hits from a fall, not weapon damage. Both Suns and Neurohelm managed to exhibit examples of target saturation this match, using it to maximize the longevity of their units and the amount of time they had to take shots. Neurohelm notably used it in round 4, with the charger exposing itself to the Hunchback when the Hunchback had a line on the Annihilator, and the Spider swinging north to try to flank the Shrek. Suns ultimately chose to focus on the charger in order to prevent it from landing a possible kick to the head of the Hunchback, and in doing so were unable to start degrading the Annihilator's defenses. The result of this was that the assault mech would be that much harder to deal with in subsequent rounds. The choice to focus on the charger was not the wrong one. The possibility of having one's head removed by a kick so early in the match is not a good idea to ignore. By choosing to expose the charger this turn rather than wait for a future charger rear shot, the charger potentially saved the Annihilator a significant amount of damage, while allowing both mechs to maximize the amount of time they could apply damage. Suns used the same tactic with their measured approach with the Shrek and Megamek. The Megamek easily could have outpaced the vehicle on this terrain, but by holding back, the two units were able to expose themselves simultaneously and begin taking shots at the same time, maximizing the amount of time each would have to fire at the enemy. Avoiding line of sight for as long as possible the way they did was the best play the Suns could have made. They had strong brawler units, so if they could get close in to land a good punch with that AC-20, the match could have easily swung the other way. There was a good chance the Hunchback survived round 3 to take a crack at Neurohelm's firebase in the following rounds. Headshots brought that mech down.